massive scam to use social media. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Tonight we have a very special guest. We've got some technical difficulties here. Not sure what's going on, but tonight we've got a very special guest. He was named one of Israel's top marketers by Forbes magazine, and he's also a tech journalist, startup marketer, and technology expert. He was also named one of the most influential bloggers on the internet. Hillel Fuld, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's such an honor. I'm not sure why we're having technical issues here. The setup, someone's changed the setup here, but we'll, here we go. That's a little bit better. So how are you? It's a real honor to have you here.
Yeah, it's an honor to be here. I'm good, day by day, doing our best.
So tell me something. You can correct me on this, because you grew up in a religious home, an Orthodox home. Your father is a prominent educator. He's a rabbi. How did a nice Jewish boy, a yeshiva boy, become one of the most influential tech guys in the world? Give us a bit of a snapshot into your story.
Well, I think we should start with the most important thing, and I have to give a shout out to your beard. It's fabulous.
Thank you.
That's first of all. So I'm from New York originally, and really from a very young age, as far back as I can remember, I love tech, right? I remember where I was standing when I pressed power on a computer for the first time, and it blew my mind. So I always loved tech. After my degree in political science, I just started writing user guides for tech companies, which was not exactly the ideal career choice for someone with ADHD. And about 20 years ago, I just started what we call today blogging. At the time, that wasn't really a thing. Started writing about tech, just my thoughts. Again, no background in tech, not an engineer, didn't study tech, no computer science or anything like that, but I always loved it. And so I just went in all on my passion. I feel like that's something a motivational speaker would say, but it's true. I went all in on my passion and just started writing, and entrepreneurs would reach out. I'd try to help, and just kind of one thing led to another, and the rest is history.
Early on in your career, you interviewed Steve Wozniak. So, well, I believe you can correct me on this. This is before you became very prominent and big yourself. How did you manage to score that interview?
I don't know what prominent and big means. I don't know how that's quantified, but I wouldn't say it was in the beginning of my career. It was maybe in the middle. How did I score that? I really just decided many years ago that I'm going to start interviewing legends on my blog. And he was obviously at the top of the list. I just reached out. I literally reached out on Facebook, and I said, Steve, my name is Hillel. You've you've inspired me. I'd love to interview you. And he immediately said no. But he did reply, which was cool. He said no, but I was not giving up on that. So I waited a year and I wrote him again. And again, he said no. Third time I reached out, I said, listen, what would it take? I'll send you 10 questions by email. I don't have to bother you. Just respond when convenient. He said, okay. I sent him the questions. He sent me the answers. I published it. And then thing went very, very viral. And in the comments of one of my posts on the interviews, Wozniak commented and said, had I known you were this popular, I would have let you interview me 3 years ago, which was cool. But yeah, literally there's no crazy story. I just reached out.
And you said something profound, because there's a lot of concern, because you're quite big into, obviously, as a tech expert in AI technology. You've spoken a lot about it. A lot of people are worried that AI is going to replace humans. People are going to lose jobs. But you've actually said something profound. You said that AI is not going to replace humans. Humans who use AI will replace humans who don't. Could you elaborate on that statement?
Yeah, absolutely. I think every single time a new technology is invented, take the tractor, right? Farmers freaked out. The internet, encyclopedias freaked out, right? Libraries freaked out. And I think that's human nature, right? We're kind of scared of change. And so new technologies scare us. That's always been the case. The mobile phone, every single time a new technology is invented, humans freak out. And that's what's going on today with AI, right? People, it's going to replace you. All I have to say is if AI can replace you, then you're clearly not maximizing your human potential. So I don't think AI is going to replace anyone. I think AI is a tool, just like the internet was a tool. And I think it's going to be net positive for humanity. But yeah, it will definitely bring with it change. There's no question about it. And again, if you're sitting in an office all day, data entry into an Excel sheet with just like, then you know what? Sorry to say so, but you should be replaced. So I think that no one should be scared of AI. I think it definitely requires regulation and definitely requires us to stay on top of it. But I'm not concerned, and I have no doubt it will be net positive for humanity.
Do you have any concerns about AI falling into the wrong hands? Because you say humans who use AI will replace humans who don't. What if these humans who use AI don't have a moral compass?
It's a great question. I think that question could be asked about anything, right? I think that, think about transportation, right? What happens if whoever's developing the software that will make our cars autonomous, what happens if they have malicious intent, right? You could say that about anything. But yeah, AI is a very, very powerful thing. I think people don't realize. People talk about AI being smarter than a human being. AI is not smarter than a human being. AI is smarter than all of humanity combined, right? So this is a very intelligent, for lack of a better term, a very intelligent technology. And so, yeah, we need to definitely monitor it, make sure that it doesn't get into the wrong hands. But again, I think that's a question it's a fair and valid question. I just think it's a question that's not particular to AI. I think it's a question to all technology.
And we see what's going on in communist China. Do you think that could be the future for Western countries, potentially, that being misused in that way for surveillance?
So I don't subscribe to all the hysteria about China. Like, oh, TikTok's China. Oh my God, they have access to our TikToks. Like, okay, like what are they going to use? Some little girl dancing to create World War III? Like, it's so silly, and these phones, like Huawei phones, the fact that they were banned from America is just absolutely ridiculous. Huawei was, because after Apple, I think they were the most successful or the company that sold the most phones. Their phones are phenomenal. So I don't, backdoor and all these things. Again, it's hysteria. I don't think, not to say that the Chinese government is not problematic. Of course it is, but I don't really subscribe to that. I think technology is technology. Yeah, you have to take precautions. I'll give you an example, right? I'm going to jump right in here and say the IDF, Israel Defense Forces, uses drone technology all the time. And there's only really one leading company in the drone world, which is DJI, which is Chinese. So in this case, where it's life and death, they do take the GPS chip out of it and remove anything that could potentially be a risk. But generally speaking, I don't think it's a real concern, because if there was a real backdoor to China from Huawei phones, for example, how hard would it be to find that? Like, we would have found that a long time ago. And I think it's hysteria, and I'm not too concerned. And I think even more so, I think we should, instead of pushing back on Chinese technology, I think we should adopt it, because some of the things that they make are objectively superior to American technology. So I think it's time to stop with the hysteria and just adopt it and work together on just disrupting the world.
There's a lot of people in our audience who are going to be watching this who aren't overly familiar with Israel's startup success story. There are also people out there that want to boycott Israel and are not a little bit naive about Israel's contribution in the technology space as well as in other spaces. For people that aren't in the know, how did Israel become the startup nation? How did a small country achieve such phenomenal success and reach?
So first, let's start with the second question. Those that want to boycott Israel, let's just be honest here, okay? If you want to boycott Israel, you can't use your iPhone, right? Because the chip is developed in Herzliya in Israel. You can't unlock your iPhone because PrimeSense was the company that invented Face ID. So you can't use your iPhone, period, full stop. You can't water your garden because drip irrigation was developed in Technion in Haifa. You can't use Waze on the way to work because that's an Israeli company. And even if you want to use Google Maps, Google acquired Waze, you can't use Google either. And you can't use Google, period. Then you get to work, you can't take a picture because dual lens technology was developed in Israel. You can't use the pill cam, right? If you're sick or something like that. You can't use voice over IP, right? And I mean, you can't use AI, right? NVIDIA is like all over Israel. NVIDIA, 15% of NVIDIA staff is in Israel, right? So you can't really use any AI. And the list just goes on and on. There's basically all cancer research in Israel. Like, you can't do anything in the modern world without using Intel, right? All your computers have Intel chips, right? Intel is massive in Israel, right? They've Jerusalem offices. They're acquiring Israeli companies. So you can't boycott Israel and use any modern technology. Let's just put that out there, number one. Number two, just for your viewers and listeners to understand, Israel has more entrepreneurs per capita than any country in the world. Israel is dominating across all sectors, and no matter what metric you want to use, whether it's how much money is invested in Israel, where that money's coming from in terms of the quality of that capital, whether it's creativity, whether it's success stories, both private companies and public companies, and on and on and on, multinationals that have set up shop in Israel. Israel is absolutely dominating the technology sector. And, maybe second to Silicon Valley, Israel is the leader of the tech world. And, how that happened, how a country smaller than New Jersey in the worst neighborhood on earth came to be this technology superpower is a topic for a lot of literature. I think the first thing one might want to read is Startup Nation, which is a book that answers that question. But to sum it up, the answer is there are many components that lead to Israel's dominance in tech. So there's definitely I would say the Jewish culture, which is we're always in survival mode. We've always been in survival mode. And now we are at home in our state, in our indigenous homeland. And so we have this excess energy that now we're using to change the world through tech, right? But there's the government that plays a significant role in promoting and encouraging innovation in Israel. There's the army, obviously, 8,200 and other intelligence units that encourage and support innovation and out-of-the-box thinking, and on and on. There are so many reasons how Israel, or so many things that led to Israel becoming this technology superpower. But what's fascinating is that despite the fact that 2024 was Israel's most challenging year since its inception, and we were literally fighting an existential war throughout the entire year, all of those numbers and all of those things that I just mentioned did not slow down in 2024. We broke records in M&A. We broke records in funding. We broke records in multinationals doubling down on Israel, like NVIDIA and Microsoft and Google and Apple and Amazon, etc. So it's pretty remarkable what's happening in Israel, and there's no signs of it slowing down.
It's amazing how ignorant some of these people are, pro-Palestinian activists. They lead the charge. They say that you have to boycott Coca-Cola, McDonald's, Starbucks. Those are the three main companies that they are actively campaigning against. But they just don't realize that it basically encompasses just about all of their technology. And they use and they utilize this technology.
Right. The funny thing, by the way, about that is that Starbucks isn't even in Israel. I don't even know where they're picking on Starbucks. Starbucks is not even in Israel. There is McDonald's in Israel, but you can't. You literally cannot boycott Israel. It's absurd to even, I see some of these BDS people, some of these people who are anti-Israel trying to boycott Israel, and they're using Wix as their platform to build their website. Wix is an Israeli company. So these people have no clue what the hell they're talking about. But it is, you got to bang your head in the wall or you got to laugh. And I laugh. I just laugh at all these people. Like, good luck boycotting Israel. Absolutely impossible.
Starbucks, ironically, as far as I know, is a woke company. It's far left, and I believe they don't support Israel, which is ironic.
Yep. I don't know why people are picking on Starbucks. I really don't. I don't know where that came from. They're not even in Israel, and they've said nothing to support Israel. It's absurd.
They had a Jewish CEO, I think, or founder, a Jewish founder. I think that's the only reason.
That's the crux of the issue, right? Is he's Jewish, and therefore what? right? I mean, Jewish content creators on the internet are being harassed day and night in their comments, about Israel. And some of these people have never stepped foot in Israel, have not even associated with Israel. Some of them are not even like Zionists, and they're being attacked. Why? Because they're Jews. So those that claim, oh, we're not anti-Jewish, we're just anti-Zionist, and explain to me why synagogues and Jewish institutions and Jewish content creators are being attacked when they have absolutely nothing to do with Zionism.
Which is interesting, because in Australia we had I wouldn't call them anti-Zionist, a non-Zionist synagogue attacked the Adass Israel synagogue. And there's quite a few people out there. I mean, there are people in Australia, some people, not everyone, that are saying that it's a false flag, which is predictable. They're saying that the Jews did it. But the other thing is they're trying to frame that as legitimate criticism of Israel, of Israel's government policy. So I think that says a lot. That speaks volumes in itself.
Absurd. Absolutely absurd.
And you are now devoting a lot of your time to Israel activism. And I used to follow your late brother, Ari Fuld. A lot of people here that might be watching may not be familiar with him, but he was a brilliant debater, very unique in his debating style. I always picked up on the fact that he never seemed to have any resentment or bear a grudge against the person that he would debate against, whether it was usually there were far left Jews, and I think it was on one channel, Israel National News or Israel TV, something along those lines. Tell us a little bit about your brother and his activism for people that aren't familiar with your late brother.
So we'll start from the end. Ari was one above me in the lineup. We're 5 brothers, and 6.5 years ago, he was walking in his town where he lived outside of Jerusalem, and a Palestinian boy, a kid, basically, 16-year-old kid, and that's an important point. He wasn't a Hamas terrorist. He was just a Palestinian kid living in Israel with no oppression and no occupation, who woke up one morning and decided today would be a good day to murder a Jew. And he came from behind Ari, stabbed him in his neck and a main artery, at which point Ari was clinically dead, but somehow miraculously was able to chase him down and shoot him before he murdered his next victim, a woman named Hillel, who just served this terrorist a falafel, not knowing obviously that he's a terrorist. Ari shot him, saved Hillel's life, and then Ari collapsed and died. The terrorist lived, and he was obviously sentenced to life in prison in Israel. But a few weeks ago, he was let out as part of the hostage deal to bring back the innocent hostages that are being held in Gaza for a year and a half already under inhumane, Holocaust-like conditions.
And I've read that you had obviously mixed feelings about that murderer's release. Tell us a little bit about that, about your reaction to him being released.
So yeah, I don't have mixed feelings about him being released. Obviously, him being released is a terrible tragedy, both personally and nationally. What I have mixed feelings about is whether or not this deal should have been done. And the answer is both. It's both horrible and beautiful, because on the one hand, again, we're releasing thousands of monsters, literal monsters. On the other hand, we see these poor hostages taken out of the dungeons of hell in Gaza, reunited with their families. And so in a way, I kind of feel like Ari saved lives in his lifetime, saved lives in his death, and now he's saving lives after he died, because again, these people are reunited because of Ari. So it's a terrible, terrible deal, but it's also a beautiful deal. And I think it speaks volumes to the value system of the Jewish people that we will pay such a steep price to bring our people back. And, bringing our hostages / prisoners back is a fundamental pillar of Judaism, something we pray about every day. There's literally a blessing. One of the first things we say in the morning is a blessing, asking God to free our prisoners. So it's so fundamental to Judaism. And, we're paying a very steep, horrible price, but it speaks volumes. And I think that our people, whether it's soldiers or civilians, need to know that if, God forbid, something like this happens to them, that we will do whatever we can to bring them back.
Because these Hamas terrorists, the same ones that were responsible for October 7th, they were, including Sinwar, the late terrorist leader of Hamas.
Do you hear that background noise, by the way?
Do I?
You don't hear it? Do you hear any background noise? No?
No.
Somebody's doing something up there. I don't know. Okay, good. As long as you don't hear it.
Yeah. All good. So he was released in exchange for one soldier, Gilad Shalit. I can hear the background noise now, but it's not coming from my end.
No, it's coming from my end. Can you hold on a second?
No, that's okay. Yeah, no worries.
Give me 1 second.
Sure. Haley? So basically, we had thousands of terrorists, including Sinwar, that were released for Gilad Shalit, so for one soldier. and then these terrorists went on to basically perpetuate the October 7th attack. There seems to be a track record. So they're releasing hostages for, one hostage or a couple of hostages, a bunch of dead bodies, for thousands of terrorists who then go on to commit even worse atrocities. Do you have any concerns that perhaps in the future we might see something worse than October 7th?
I want to believe that Israel learned its lesson. I think that we were sleeping at the wheel kind of thing. I think that, we were like, yeah, Hamas didn't partake in the last rounds of violence, so they must be a peaceful organization all of a sudden, right? And I think that we were very naive, and we were just not paying attention to what's happening on the border. And we know that there were soldiers who warned the Israeli leadership that there's something going on the border of Gaza. And in a very Israeli-like way, we were just like, yeah, it'll be okay. And so I want to believe that could never happen again. But you know what? I never imagined in my wildest, darkest dreams that October 7th could happen. So I don't, who knows?
Yeah, that was really mind-boggling, because Israel apparently had the most sophisticated, most secure border in the world, with high surveillance. And in addition to that, the female guards that were along the border that were warning their Israeli superiors were basically intimidated into silence. So I find that quite bizarre, to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, there's many questions surrounding October 7th. Obviously that's one of them, but more fundamentally, something that I've yet to hear an answer to is, where was everyone for 8 hours? Because if I'm in the all the way north, let's say I'm at the end of Israel, right? And there's an attack all the way south, a helicopter ride would be like a half hour. Where was everyone for 8 hours? And again, an hour, 2 hours, they were in shock. No one knew what was going on. 3 hours, 8 hours, where the heck was everyone? So there are many questions about this, how Hamas did what they did, how Israel didn't react. Many questions that I believe we'll probably be investigating for many years into the future.
And one of the most ridiculous things, I mean, we mentioned the hostage exchanges, and they're putting on these displays, Hamas, these barbaric displays where they're celebrating, obviously, where they exchange the Bibas family and with other hostages. And you see thousands of people. I mean, there's a lot of talk about there being a Holocaust in Gaza, about starving, famine and mass starvation amongst the Gazans, and genocide. And yet you see these people that are properly dressed. They look like they're well-fed, unlike the hostages, and they've got their smartphones out and they're celebrating and they're filming this whole spectacle. It just flies in the face of all of the propaganda, and people still believe in it.
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, it really is wild. I'll tell you, you don't have to be a Middle East expert. You don't have to know anything about history. Forget what happened in the past, okay? Right now, if you're speaking up against Israel, just listen and pay attention to the things that you're saying. The same people who are saying globalize the intifada, which means literal bring radical Islamic violence to everywhere, are the same people who are calling for a ceasefire, which is literally the opposite of a globalized intifada, right? The same people who are saying from the river to the sea, which literally means erase Israel, are the same people calling for a two-state solution. Which one is it? The same people who are saying that hostages are being fed well in Gaza are the same people saying there's starvation in Gaza, right? The same people that saying that they're an open air prison in Gaza, and that they're refugees, are the ones complaining when they're being offered to relocate to a better place, right? The same people who are saying they're all suffering there are walking around with their Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultras in Gaza, taking all these high definition videos. The same people who are saying, oh, October 7th was our proudest day in our history, we'll do it over and over and over again, are the same people saying Israel's lying. It's staggering how their own narrative contradicts itself. You don't have to prove them wrong. They do it themselves. It's wild to see. And again, otherwise intelligent people, otherwise moral people, for some reason, when it comes to the Jews, all logic goes out the window, and they believe these ridiculous lies that, again, you don't have to know anything. You just have to listen to what they're saying. They're contradicting themselves. It's wild and staggering to see.
And they're not just openly calling for the destruction of Israel, in America, in Australia, in the UK. They're also openly calling for the destruction of their own host nations. In Australia, they refer to Australia as a colony. They ally themselves with the indigenous movement of Australia, or they claim to be sympathetic towards them, but it's just an opportunistic grift on their part. And they're openly calling for the destruction of Australia, of America, and terrorism. So they're not just a threat to Israel. They're a threat to their host countries, and a lot of people seem to be asleep.
Yeah, I mean, again, there's the list of irony, the ironic things on the list of things that they say. It's this. They say, we're fighting for the Palestinian people, right? And yet, when the Palestinian people say what they want, they state clearly what their intention is. They're like, yeah, they don't mean it. They don't mean it. Like, we're supporting you and we're not listening to you, right? Radical Islam is quite clear, what their mission is. There's no debate about this. And yet the woke left-leaning, people in the West simply refuse to, not only do they refuse to recognize it, but anybody who recognizes radical Islam and how much of a global cancer it's become is labeled an Islamophobe. It's like, wait a second, you're fighting for them, but you won't listen to them. It's like they're saying we want to kill all infidels and America's the Satan. And the people who are fighting for those same people are like, yeah, they don't mean it. It's like, dude, if you're fighting for them, listen to what they're saying.
And you speak about the woke left. Obviously, on the right, there's always been a lot of strong support for Israel. But are you starting to see a shift and a change in attitudes on the right?
I mean, it's hard to kind of clearly categorize, but, if we're looking at the Republican Party versus the Democratic Party, it's quite clear. I mean, the Democratic Party has become basically an anti-Semitic party. Not to say every single person in the party is anti-Semitic, but the tolerance level that they have for clear anti-Semitism is nauseating, right? And again, not to say there aren't anti-Semites on the right. Of course there are. In fact, I would say that the far right and the far left have absolutely nothing in common except for one thing, and that is the hatred of the Jew. Which is just, again, begs the question, what did the Jewish people do to be hated so much? All they did was good things in this world. Israel leads the way in cancer research. Jewish people have been disproportionately awarded Nobel Prizes. The Jewish people have been a source of light in the world. And so why are we hated so much? It's a fundamental question I've struggled with my entire life. But the reality is that the left, the Democratic Party and the woke culture and the left has become, blatantly anti-Semites, right? I mean, I think the whole, we're not anti-Semitic, we're only anti-Zionist. People have to realize how absurd that statement is. Like, Zionism is as core to Judaism as Jesus is to Christianity. You can't ignore Zionism if you're a Jew. Jews prayed to Zion, which is Jerusalem, for thousands of years, right? So you can't separate the two. Furthermore, forget theology. If you're anti-Zionist, then you are stating you do not believe that the Jewish people, especially after what they experienced in World War II and the Holocaust, do not deserve a safe haven, do not deserve a state of their own in a world with tens of Muslim and Christian countries. The Jews do not deserve a single state. If you're saying that, then you're an anti-Semite. Like, why is this so complicated? If you're against Zionism, if you're against the Jews going back to their indigenous homeland to settle the land after thousands of years of exile and being massacred and butchered in endless countries, you do not believe the Jews deserve a home, then you're anti-Jewish. Like, let's stop with this charade of like, I'm not an anti-Semite, I'm just anti-Zionist. That's ridiculous. You cannot separate the two.
One of the most interesting things that I've seen, which is mind-boggling things, I'd say, is people in countries like the US, in Canada, in Australia. We're talking about massive countries. They're all continents in their own rights. Australia in its own right is bigger than the entire European continent. America's even bigger than Australia and Canada, etc. And you've got people there who claim that live there, that are of European origin, that claim that Israel is an imperialist entity. And the Jews are living on stolen land. I just find that mind-boggling and ironic. What do you make of that cognitive dissonance and hypocrisy?
So it's a really basic, simple question. Really, it all comes down to this. If you think Israel doesn't have a right to exist, I have one question for you. What other country doesn't have a right to exist, in your opinion? If the answer is none, and Israel's the only country that in your mind doesn't have a right to exist, the only country in the whole world is the Jewish country, I don't think I need to finish that sentence, right? So, this blood libel of Israel being this colonialist, apartheid, it's absurd. And the people that believe that oftentimes won't listen to facts, unfortunately, but you can look at any data that you want, whether it's how many Arabs live freely in Israel, how many Arabs are in the parliament, Supreme Court justices in Israel, to how many Gazans have begged for work permits in Israel, to how many prisoners in Israeli prison have asked to stay in the prison because they know they're better off there than they are in Gaza. It's absurd. I mean, not to mention the fact that if you try to enter any Arab town in Israel, there's a massive red sign by the entrance saying, if you're a Jew, you cannot pass this point. I mean, apartheid, Israel's the apartheid, like ethnic cleansing. Israel, have you seen Muslim countries? How many Jews are in Yemen? How many Jews are in Morocco? How many Jews are in Iran? These places were massive Jewish communities. They've been ethnically cleansed. So it's kind of like a basic deflection. That's their strategy, is everything they're guilty of, they blame the Jews for, right? It's absurd. There's absolutely nothing imperialistic. There's nothing, apartheid. There's not, the occupation is just a made up historical fabrication. And if you don't believe me, and if you're watching this and you have your opinion is that Israel was occupying Gaza before October 7th, which justified October 7th, let's put aside for the fact that you are actually justifying pedophilia. I'm putting that aside. If Israel, in your opinion, occupied Gaza before October 7th, please just answer one simple question. What was the disengagement? I'll tell you what the disengagement was. In 2005, Israel forcefully removed 10,000 of its citizens, including dug up dead bodies from Gaza. And we evacuated Gaza and handed it to the Palestinian people on a silver platter. And I say Palestinian people with air quotes because that's a whole different discussion. The Palestinian people are Israelis. Palestine was Israel. Again, different discussion. 2005, Israel left Gaza. There was no occupation. There was not a single Jew in Gaza on October 6th, other than a few hostages that Hamas kidnapped in the past. There was not a single Jew in Gaza. So don't give me this oppression and occupation garbage, because if you're going to tell me that the reason all of this terror, all of this quote unquote Palestinian terror is happening because of occupation and oppression, presumably if you have the logic of a 4-year-old, if I show you that before the so-called occupation, there was still Arab terror against Jews, if I show you there was Arab terror against Jews before there was a state of Israel, then your entire argument falls by the wayside, right? What was 1929? Because the state of Israel was established in 1948. 1929, before any occupation or oppression, before the state of Israel was established, Arabs were massacring Jews in Hebron. So let's stop with these lies. And again, you don't have to be an expert. You just have to be a logical person to realize that their narrative is just full of contradictions and paradoxes.
A little known fact as well, like you mentioned, the Hebron massacre, the Jaffa riots, all the way back to the 19th, 18th, 16th century, there were massacres and pogroms. But people aren't aware that the Mufti of Jerusalem, the former Mufti, he was also the uncle of Yasser Arafat and the founder of Fatah, which is the leading faction within the PLO. He collaborated in the Holocaust. A lot of people aren't aware of this little known fact, quote unquote.
Yep, we got pictures of the Grand Mufti sitting with Nazis. But, you mentioned Arafat. You got to laugh, right? Because Arafat is the father of the quote-unquote Palestinian people. He established, he opened the Palestinian Liberation Organization in 1964. So his whole thing was Palestinian people. Where was Arafat born? In Cairo. He's Egyptian, okay? That's exactly the point. The Palestinian people are Muslims, Arabs who came from Egypt and Jordan, okay? And again, even their father, Arafat himself, a terrorist, was born in Cairo, Egypt. And the point is, this whole entire identity of theirs is one historical fabrication. And again, if you're watching this and you disagree, just answer a simple question. When was the Arab Palestinian state established? Because presumably you say Israel occupied and stole land from these Arab Palestinians who lived in, the state that Israel occupied. So tell me, when was it established? When was there an Arab Palestinian state in this region? What was the national anthem? What was the currency? Who was the prime minister? Name me one single Palestinian leader, okay? Name me one single Arab Palestinian leader before Yasser Arafat. Because if they have this rich history of thousands of years, you should be able to name some Palestinian leaders. Name me one. Didn't exist because there was no Arab Palestinian state. Palestine was a name given by the Romans to ridicule the Jews in the region. And Palestine pre-1948 was this land of Israel. And we have artifacts, we have coins, we have, archaeological evidence to that effect. There's no question. If you know history, you know that an Arab Palestinian state never existed in the state of the world. It never happened. There was never such a state.
Even the Palestinian flag, if you look at the history, that's the Pan-Arab flag, and it symbolizes the different colors. According to their own admission, if you read it on one of the major Palestinian websites, political websites, they explain the Pan-Arab flag, it's symbolic. The different colors symbolize the different phases of Islamic Arab conquest of North Africa, of the Levant, of Europe, each of the colors. And even the keffiyeh that the university students and other anti-imperialists wear in solidarity with indigenous people, that particular specific design, that I believe there's the gray, and then there's the another color. I think it's the orange that just symbolizes Jordan's army. That was specifically invented, that pattern and that material, by a British man, Lieutenant General John Glubb. And a lot of people don't realize that that in itself is a symbol of colonialism.
Yeah, I think these people lack even the most basic level of knowledge. I mean, so many of them say from the river to the sea and couldn't even name what river to what sea they're talking about. So many of them yell globalized intifada. They have no idea what that even means, right? And so the question of Palestinian statehood, let's start with the fact that Israel has offered them a state countless times. Israel offered them 98% of what they want, and they said no. Why did they say no? And the answer is because their goals from day one have never been to have a state. And you could look at their charter. And the reason they never had a state is because the reason Israel does have a state is because Israel focused from day one on building an amazing country. And the Palestinians from day one focused on destroying an amazing country. That's all they wanted it to do, to erase Israel. It's in their charter. At no point did they ever say they want a state. You cannot find me a single Palestinian leader ever who's declared they want to live alongside Israel. Never. It didn't exist. There's never been such a thing. All they want is to erase Israel. That's their entire identity. And that's why, you know, they're quote unquote refugees. Give me refugees. There's never been a group of refugees that has increased in number generation over generation. There's only the Palestinians who can inherit the status of a refugee. They settle Gaza. Their kids are refugees. They're in and they're in an open air prison, right? We're refugees in an open air prison. So if you're refugees in an open air prison, then how come when Trump is saying to you, let's relocate you to a better place, they're saying no? What are they saying? This is our home. If it's your home, then how are you a refugee? Right? Again, the paradoxes just don't end. It's such utter nonsense, the things that they claim. And not only is it not based on reality, it's not even based on logic.
And also, with everything that we've seen the last 15 months in the US, with the college encampments, the protests, the demonstrations, stuff that we're seeing online, do you believe this is all coordinated by state actors?
I don't think there's a question of belief at this point. We have documented evidence to that effect that these protests and these encampments were funded by Qatar, by Iran. You know, how is it that October 8th, there was literally thousands of these people in their tents? Everyone had the same tents and the same flags and the same, you know, signs. Who paid for this stuff? Where did it come from, right? So I don't think there's any doubt whatsoever that this is funded and coordinated. But you know, it's sad. It's sad to see these, you know, American youth that are so deeply indoctrinated. They just simply don't know what the hell they're talking about. They base their opinions on TikTok videos. And when someone has the dialogue with them and asks them questions about what they're standing there and protesting, they just know nothing. It's absurd.
And we've just had Donald Trump, obviously, inaugurated over a month ago. Give us your report card on him. What do you? How is on his 30 days in office? It's been 6 weeks.
Yeah, I think first of all, let's start with the fact that I understand why people don't like him. I get it. He's not exactly your diplomatic president, and he's maybe even a narcissist. I don't know what he is, but I get it. He says dumb things. He meets dumb people. I get it. And I'm not asking you to marry the guy, nor am I asking you to hire him to babysit your kids. You vote for a president based on policy. And if you think that after everything Donald Trump has done in his first few weeks, months in office, if you think that Donald Trump doesn't have good policy, then you have Trump derangement syndrome. I think there are so many things that he did. Let's just take the most basic example, because we're talking about tech, right? You know, he brought companies like Apple back into America, and Tim Cook has announced formally that he's going to be investing $500 billion back into America. If you can't acknowledge that, let's forget everything else, just that. If you can't say, wow, good job, Trump, then you'll never admit that he does anything right. And the things that he's done for, you know, to battle anti-Semitism, these are objectively good things. And if someone's unable to recognize that, then they don't want to recognize that. So has he, you know, done things that are controversial, problematic, you know, everything pertaining to, let's say, gender? Sure, we can have that debate. I have no problem with that. But the things that he's done literally in his first few weeks in office far exceed what Biden did in 4 years.
He sparked off a trade war with Canada. Who would have thought? And now he's on friendly terms with Putin. So he's made enemies out of Canada, and he's friends with Russia. What do you think of that development?
I think, listen, it's sad to see America's allies basically at war with America right now. There's no question. Obviously, Canada and many other countries. But the flip side is it actually doesn't make much sense if you really think about it and put emotion aside. It really doesn't make much sense that America's spending trillions of dollars to, fund these countries and, send, take their products into America, generate for them endless money and endless profit, and it's just not a reciprocal, relationship. They don't give America anything. In fact, not only do they not give America anything, but there are so many policies, whether it's just allowing the anti-America voice on their streets, right? There are so many things that they do to damage and to harm America. Why on earth should America continue to fund these places? So on the one hand, again, on an emotional level, it's sad to see. But if you take a step back and you look at this from a, let's call it, strategic perspective, it makes all the sense in the world.
What do you think of Trump's stance on Ukraine and Israel? As a lot of people have criticized Israel for turning their back on Ukraine. What do you make of that?
Israel turned its back on Ukraine. Go look at how Ukraine voted in the UN every single time. They've backstabbed Israel endless times, which is ironic in a way because Zelensky's Jewish. But Ukraine has been anything but a friend to Israel and to the Jewish people. Historically, they've been horrible to Israel, and the Holocaust is just yet another example of that. So, let's not pretend that Ukraine's been so good to Israel and Israel's just abandoning and backstabbing Ukraine. Absolutely not the case, not even close. And watching that showdown in the White House between Trump, J.D. Vance, and Zelensky was, I'm not going to lie, I was cringing. It was embarrassing. No question about it. It wasn't diplomatic. It was embarrassing. There's no sugarcoating it. But it could have been done in a more respectful way. But the fundamental issue here and the real, driving force behind that showdown is absolutely justified. I think, how could Zelensky not come to the White House and just express gratitude? How could he not sign that deal when America is sending them billions of dollars and literally ensuring their, continuity and their survival? All he should have done is come to the White House and said thank you. Instead, he was fighting with them. He was being sarcastic. He was ridiculing. That was disgusting. And so they could have handled it better, 100%. But again, the fundamental here is America was 100% right. And we see that as Zelensky came back and apologized, right? I mean, yes, he came back to apologize because he realized he needs America. But I don't think anyone has any doubts that the way he behaved that day in the White House was unacceptable.
And Trump, for a lot of people that support Israel, obviously Trump's a breath of fresh air compared to the previous hostile Biden administration. And he sent out a very tough message recently to Hamas. He said, release all the hostages or else. However, on the ground, he's got negotiators that appear to be using a different tactic. So Witkoff and Adam, I think his name's Boiler, I may have mispronounced his last name. The latter guy in particular seems to be appeasing Hamas, trying to do a lot of outreach with their leaders. We seem to be getting a lot of mixed messages from the Trump administration. What do you make of that?
So that's the thing. I call it nuance, right? The anti-Trump crowd he's all bad. He can do no good, right? I'm a nuanced guy, and I think that he's been incredible for Israel and for America, and he's made some mistakes. And I think negotiating directly with Hamas to release American hostages is unacceptable. And I think that some of the things that the guy you just met, Adam Boiler, who, by the way, I just yesterday noticed he's following me on Twitter, which is so random, but the things that he said are unacceptable. And it's not good. I'm not going to lie. It's not good, but that doesn't take away all the good things that he's done, right? So nuance. He's done good things. He's done bad things, and that's human nature. So I think the fact that they're negotiating with Hamas is unacceptable, and I think that I think that what he said in terms of all hell will break loose is the right message, and I think that Hamas only understands fear and force, and that's the way terrorists conduct themselves. So the concept of America negotiating with terrorists, while I understand that Trump wants peace and that he's Mr. Deal Maker, I get it, but to me that's crossing a red line. What are you negotiating with? Since when does America negotiate with terrorists, right?
And I have a concern when Trump issues such a tough statement, or release them in a certain time period or else, and then he's got this Adam Boiler guy coming in with a different message that Hamas is just not going to take his threats seriously. Yeah. It just undermines the whole thing. Yep. And also, you released a video recently about your thoughts on Bibi Netanyahu. You were saying that he was at a crossroads. What do you make of what do you think he's doing? Is he deliberately stalling for time because he wants to get more hostages out? What do you think's going through? I know that you're not a mind reader, but what do you think's going through his mind if you were to guess?
I think those that suffer from Trump derangement syndrome got a package 2 for 1, and they almost all of them suffer from Netanyahu derangement syndrome as well. And I think that there's a nice overlap between Trump haters and Bibi haters. And to be clear, I didn't vote for Bibi, but I don't think anyone in their right mind would even suggest that there's anyone in Israel who could have withstood the pressure that came from the Biden administration not to enter Rafah, not to enter Lebanon. So I think he's done an incredible job. That being said, he was prime minister on October 7th, which is a massive failure. So he definitely needs to take accountability, but not in the middle of a war. And so I think that, from the get-go, from the beginning of the war, I was kind of concerned, does he even have a strategy? Like, what's he doing? Like, just bombing, indiscriminately, which is what the world accused us of, or does he know what he's doing? And I didn't have an answer to that question, but it became clear as time went on that he had a very clear strategy, which was to eliminate proxy by proxy. Iran has endless proxies in the Middle East, from Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis in Yemen, it's Syria, right? Assad. And so Israel was knocking out proxy by proxy. So it was clear that Netanyahu did have a strategy, but again, we're stuck between a rock and a hard place, because on the one hand, you can't just flatten Gaza, which is what any other country would do because we have our hostages there. On the other hand, you have to negotiate with Hamas. How do you defeat Hamas? But if you don't defeat Hamas and you didn't win the war, so it's not an easy situation to be in. And like I said in that video, I'm just thankful I'm not in Netanyahu's shoes, because this is really, really tough stuff. And I don't know what the solution is, but yeah, it's a decision at the end of the day. I think these two objectives that we've defined, which is obliterating Hamas and getting our hostages back, are somewhat mutually exclusive, because if you're obliterating Hamas, you can't negotiate with them. And if you're negotiating with them, you can't obliterate them. So it's not easy.
What are your thoughts on Trump's strategy with Iran? He recently wrote a letter to the supreme leader, the Iranian Ayatollah, and expressed a willingness to negotiate with him and come to the table. Do you think it's worth negotiating with someone like Iran? That seems to be a bad faith actor.
Yeah, I mean, again, Trump is known for his deal making, right? So I assume he'd prefer to have a deal than to attack. But I don't think anyone has any, I don't think anyone's kidding themselves that Iran's going to agree to such a deal. So I think an attack on Iran's nuclear facilities is inevitable, and I think that Israel took out Iran's aerial defense systems for a reason, and I think it's inevitable. I think it's imminent, and I don't think there's any avoiding it. Of course, if he could strike a deal with them that they'll stop developing nuclear abilities, then that would be great. But let's not live in la la land. That ain't going to happen.
What do you make of the situation in Syria? Now we're seeing all these images of wholesale massacres in Syria. A lot of people, not a lot of people, but some people are blaming Israel for being behind ISIS or that particular offshoot of ISIS in Syria. The interesting thing is the Alawites and the Druze are turning to Israel for support.
Yeah,
which is interesting.
Again, it's so absurd. It's so preposterous. Like, the Jews are going to be blamed for anything, right? It's unbelievable. Israel brought down the Assad regime, which is objectively a murderous, genocidal, mass murdering regime. Israel brought them down. So instead of thanking Israel, we're blaming Israel for those that replaced the Assad regime. It's absurd. But, those guys that replaced them, the Assad regime are not exactly lovers of the West. Let's not kid ourselves. But they're, they got their suit-ons. They're kind of like, Fatah, kind of like the more quote unquote moderate Palestinian leadership, which, let's just be clear who they are. They're paying my brother's murderer a monthly salary. Like, this is what we're talking about here. So, definitely the current rulers of Syria are not our best friends. But to blame Israel for that, it's just beyond. Israel dismantled all of Assad's weapons and warehouses and everything, as soon as it could. And so to blame Israel for this is just absolutely absurd. But it begs the question, with this actual genocide going on in Syria, well-documented genocide, where are all the encampments? Where are all the protests? Where are all these people that have been yelling genocide for a year and a half? Where are they now? Right? And it all comes down to the same thing. This isn't an Israel-Palestine thing. This is an anti-Jewish thing. It's always been an anti-Jewish thing. And whatever they can do to blame the Jews, they'll do. And so to blame Israel for Syria is absolutely ridiculous. There's no other word.
Well, there's one leader that the president, the de facto leader of Syria, the ISIS leader, has been embracing and hugging openly, and that's not Netanyahu. That's the leader of Turkey, Erdogan. So they're quite chummy, hugging each other. No one blames Turkey for what happened in Syria.
It's insane. It's insane. I don't even understand how Turkey's part of NATO. Turkey is literally harboring terrorists. They're a terrorist state. I mean, for all intents and purposes, they are a terrorist state. I don't understand how they are a member of NATO, but Yeah, Turkey is a serious problem for Israel. There's no diplomatically, militarily, they're a serious problem.
Because if Israel ever gets into conflict with Turkey, that could actually drag all of NATO into the conflict against Israel.
Yeah.
Ramifications are quite far-reaching.
Yeah, I think I don't want to even imagine such a scenario, but that scenario I would imagine would be the final straw in the not to get all religious on you here, but for a second, I think that would probably be the final straw before Mashiach, Messiah, comes, because that would be the war to end all wars.
And have you been following the situation here in Australia with the fire bombings of the synagogues and the nurses with that Israeli influencer? What do you make of? What are your thoughts?
It's heartbreaking, honestly. I think Australia used to be one of the most beautiful and peaceful countries, in the world. And I know tons of friends that are Australian. I've been there and it's beautiful. And now it's just falling apart because of radical Islam. And it's not alone in that. I think, you look at many European countries, even the United States, radical Islam is infiltrating Western civilization across all, pillars of our civilization, whether it's the judicial system, whether it's the political system. They have a very clear strategy. They say it loud and clear. And we're in the West, we're like, oh, they don't mean it. Let's stop being Islamophobe. It's absurd. It's very sad to see what's going on over there. It's tragic, to be honest.
In the UK, it's even worse. I believe Australia, it's probably 10 to 15 years behind the UK. It's really bad to the point where one will get arrested for merely posting a criticism of Islam on Facebook. You have elderly people that have been jailed, that have died in jail as a result of that. It's really quite, tell me, we're approaching Purim, which is an interesting time. It's Erev Purim. Do you see a repetition of history? Do you see the Purim story played out today?
Yeah, I think 100%. I think, the script is already written because it's already happened and it keeps happening over and over again. And it's amazing that people don't see it, right? I think someone said recently, if learning from history has taught us anything, it's that we don't learn from history, right? So, Purim is just another example of a world leader that has agreed to annihilate the Jews. In this case, Ahasuerus was the king of 127 countries, and he agreed to annihilate the Jews, and we were done. That was it. We were done. And there was no way we were getting out of that. And miraculously, we did get out of that. And so this is something that we saw in Hanukkah. Something we saw in Passover. In every generation, we see that. And in every generation, that empire that came after the Jews disappears into the history books, and we continue to thrive and flourish. So it's 100% the Purim story all over again. In a scary way, how similar it is. There's Hamas and there's Haman. Right, both start with an H, and both Hamas and Haman are they sound obviously very much alike. So I think it's a clear repetition of the Purim story.
And if you read the Midrashim, the scriptures that don't appear in the Tanakh, in the Jewish Bible, it gives a lot of backstory, and there were a lot of civil strife and civil unrest across the empire in different countries, and there were street fights, between those, and there were a lot of non-Jews that sided with the Jews when they were defending them against Haman's forces. And reading that, it just reminds me of what's going on in the world today.
Yep,
it's just striking.
It's I always say, if I had walked into a production company's office on October 6th and I had sold them the script of what we were going to witness over the next year and a half, they would say to me, "Go home and come back with a realistic script." It's unbelievable how absurd and how insane the world has gotten over the last year and a half. Logic is completely out the window. Morality is completely out the window. And again, you could either bang your head in the wall or you could just laugh. I just laugh. At this point, it's just so obviously, not a man-made situation, because it makes no sense from beginning to end. So I don't know why God does what he does, and I can't explain that, but it's so clear to me that there's something bigger going on here.
Absolutely. And Hillel, do you have any other words of wisdom that you'd like to share with our audience before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think it's important to mention, we talked about the holidays, that the ending of all those stories is one, and that is that the Jews are dancing and celebrating. And so Simchas Torah was the day that October 7th, happened, and now it's kind of stained as a holiday. It's like this tragic, but it was one of the happiest days of the year. And so it's important to mention that as dark and horrible as October 7th was, which it was, Purim was infinitely darker. And so is Hanukkah, and so are the other holidays that we celebrate. And so we will celebrate again, because when we say Am Yisrael Chai, that's not just an empty phrase. Am Yisrael Chai is a historical reality. And if you don't believe me, tell me how many Babylonian friends you have, or Assyrian friends, or any of the other empires that came after the Jewish people. They're all gone. And we're here, and we're thriving. And so that will be the ending. We will dance again on Simchas Torah, because Am Yisrael Chai is a very real historical reality.
Amen to that. Now, Hillel, you've got a presence on X and on Facebook, and I believe you're on Instagram as well. So I encourage people to follow you. Where else can people find you?
Everywhere. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, YouTube, everywhere.
Terrific. Excellent. Well, Hillel, it's such an honor and a pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much. And I hope you can come back on again.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. And let's not forget the one thing, most important thing, we will dance again.
Amen. Thank you. And thanks for watching, everyone, and God bless.
But wait, can you hear our children crying? They're calling from all